Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell. I'm going to be your host here today. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about technology both for adult cattle as well as calves. And joining me as co-host is Dr. Bob James. Bob, thank you for joining us. This is not your first time to the pub, so you must like it here.
I do. It's a wonderful, wonderful program with a great history.
Yeah, good. So, thank you for joining us. And talking about calves today is going to be Dr. Melissa Cantor from Penn State University. We've kind of got the Eastern Seaboard covered today with Virginia Tech, Penn State, and Cornell. And we've got Dr. Julio Giordano and from Cornell, and he's going to be talking about technology and how it's used in cows. And both of these folks have given presentations here at the Western Dairy Management Conference. We're going to kind of use that as our guidepost, at least in the beginning, for these conversations. Melissa, why don't we start with you? Let's hit those calves first. Just kind of give me a brief overview of what your talk was about today.
New research is changing everything we thought we knew about choline's impact on the cow and her calf, and top scientists have a lot to say about it. They are presenting new research that supports choline as a required nutrient to optimize milk production, choline as a required nutrient to support a healthy transition, choline as a required nutrient to improve calf health and growth, and choline as a required nutrient to increase colostrum quantity. This new research is solidifying choline's role as a required nutrient for essentially every cow, regardless of health status, milk production level, or body condition score. Learn more about the science that is changing the game and the choline source that is making it happen. Reassure precision-release choline from Balchem. Visit balchem.com/scientistsay to learn more.
Absolutely, yeah. So my talk today was really to describe to everyone where we're at with calf management and related to disease detection and related to actually doing something with the alerts once we have them and what we've actually tried and what has worked and what has not. Particularly, we've really kind of found out that the correlations are there. We know that calves change their activity behavior and their feeding behavior before they get these diseases like diarrhea and respiratory. But we're not quite at the point, while AI shows the potential for disease detection in calves, we're not quite yet to hit the go button. We're still got some work to do. And so that was really the big synopsis.
And what technology were you using?
Yeah, so in these particular studies, we were using accelerometers, pedometers that we put on the calves for the activity. And then for the robotic feeders, we were collecting all the information from those. So that would have been through milk meters and also manometers.
Okay. And you were able to get individual data from that, okay?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And what can you get from the, I forget what you call it, the
pedometers, the pedometers, the Fitbits for cows?
Yeah.
Yeah, so very similar to what we would get on the transition cows, but more just the activity behavior. So things like lying time, step counts, how often the calf gets up and lays down, and even activity index are all things we can use that we know are going to be associated with these diseases that calves get.
Yeah, and can you measure play? And does that have any indicators
so
in terms of health?
Great question. So play behavior, there's one particular study out there that has found that play is correlated with the particular activity index that we used for the studies. It was from Peacock Technologies was the type of pedometer that we were using for those. And but we haven't really looked at play behavior related to disease yet.
Okay.
More work to be done.
Okay, very well. And then the activity between the pedometers and consumption, any correlations there?
Yeah, so really the idea is the more information we put together, the better that we can detect disease. So really when we're taking pedometers plus a robot, we can actually find disease with a 96% accuracy 6 days before that calf has the clinical lung consolidation and the outward signs of pneumonia, such as coughing and eye discharge, nasal discharge, those sorts of things.
Okay.
But
seeing
obviously.
reduced activity.
Yeah,
So
there's
they
reduced
probably have
activity.
temperatures or having just feeling malaise.
Surprisingly, not all of them. So we suspect that a lot of these were viral infections in calves, which don't always necessarily spike a fever. Some did, some didn't. But yeah, we did see, what was really interesting to me is taking the combination of the two technologies together improves the detection accuracy better than a person. But of course, that's not reality. Most farms can't afford a robot and pedometers for their calves. So the next step is really looking at just using one, and we still get increased accuracy doing that, but not 96%,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned Fitbit, and I'm probably already know the answer, but you know, my Fitbit's measuring my
So you
heart
have a
rate
Fitbit, yeah.
and oxygen levels.
all
and
the things.
I'm going to assume that what the technology you have, you're not doing that at this point.
Not at this point. We've actually explored looking at pulse oximeters, which
Yeah.
is what you have in your Fitbit or your
Yeah.
Apple Watch. And unfortunately, calves are really good at taking those off.
Okay. Okay.
They like to eat them.
Yeah.
We've tried really hard to get that to work, and unfortunately, you'll never see that data published
Yeah.
because I lost like 80% of the data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Bob, I think you were at the presentation. What
Yep.
were some of your takeaways?
Well, you know, I come from it. We before I retired several years ago, we did a study. One of our last studies was really looking at some field situations. We had 6 farms in Virginia. We collaborated with Sandra Godden and one of her graduate students in doing some work at looking at behavior of calves and the data from the auto feeders primarily, and then disease reporting. And I think in talking to Melissa today, you know, we had farms where we had a lot more restricted intake, and I think we're just learning so much more about calf behavior. I've written an article in Popular Press, and it's titled "What Auto Feeders Have Taught Me About Feeding Calves." We've had so many misconceptions about what's normal, you know, because what had been normal for us essentially is starving the poor little things to death. And it's a very different behavior, you know, when you look at these animals when they have satiety, you know, they're just kind of cool. And so I think that's the really exciting thing. I'll end with one last thing. I met a person in England, and Melissa may come and talk about this. And she was a business person. She had a dairy beef operation, and she had 800 calves on auto feeders and really good health records. And she was highly motivated to do better. And I said, I have just the person for you. And so a couple months later, Melissa was in the United Kingdom, and I can't wait for some of the data that she's going to get from the work that one of her graduate students is doing. It's going to be, because I'm more interested in the application. I work with one of the companies that manufactures the equipment. I see the need. They've got mountains of data, and they're not doing anything with it. And so there's just a huge opportunity.
And every farm does something different, right? Some don't look at the data at all. Others are making treatment decisions off of that information, and yet...
Wait a minute, back
yeah.
up. Why
Yeah.
are they not looking at the data at all?
Well, a lot of them are just feeding calves.
Yes, they did
They're
it
not
because it's
using
going to
it.
save labor, and that's the really sad thing, you know. And they just don't. And quite frankly, that's one of the early promoters was, it's going to save labor. And when, you know, I did another presentation that's called, "Are you a calf manager or calf feeder?" And historically, on dairy farms, people were calf feeders. You know, what data did we have? You know, sometimes treatment, mortality, and that was about it. And so, you know, I work with some other operations that are not auto feeder, and getting them to develop data is like pulling eye teeth, and to make any kind of management decision. So I just get really excited with the possibilities. Melissa just really did a super job of kind of covering the waterfront far more than just the data, but also what some of the other opportunities are.
Yeah, I kind of want to get off topic here for a
well,
second real quick.
But I
Sorry,
have some
Julio.
questions for Melissa.
Yeah. Let me just wander around
Okay.
this little. you,
He's our referee
You told me
right
that you wanted me to ask.
and I do. And I
So
also
you
said
have
you
to be
got to
careful
push
when
me
you
out of
say
the
that
way.
to me.
Sorry. We are ignoring poor Julio over
No,
here.
no, that's fine.
He wants questions.
I know.
He may ask them.
Last one, I promise.
Cops are fun.
They are fun. You mentioned behavior, and I'm remembering back to a presentation that Nina Van Kaiserlink gave, and she was talking about more of the cultural behaviors. And I'm wondering, are there any learnings that you've gotten? You said, about feeding, but what
Yeah.
about culturally and interpersonal relationships, that kind of
Well,
stuff with calves?
one of the farms that I work with in Virginia is very interesting. They bought one feeder about 10 years ago, and they fed a third of their calves, and this is strictly circumstantial on the auto feeder. The other 2/3 of the calf in the calf hutches. And so, 4 or 5 years later, they saw these animals coming into the milking string, and the ones on the auto feeder it's a very well-managed herd. Boy, some of them were 2 months younger. They were better grown. And the other thing is, they were so much more easier to handle. And I want to make one comment to kind of serve as a lead-in before I forget it. And the other farms I've dealt with who started out with robotic calves, they made much better robot cows. And I think that's where the industry has just flat dropped it. They have not looked at that tie-in, and I think that's a critical part of getting that data from the calf all the way through into the cow's record. And I think there's a super opportunity. Because if we do something with the calf, I want to know that she's going to last longer in the herd and milk better.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Great
I'll try and
point.
be quiet now.
Julio, it's your turn.
So, Melissa, and I may have missed this from your great talk, by the way, but can you tell us a little bit more? Because we're talking about science, right? I mean, so yes, the auto feeders and the activity levels from the accelerometers, but which ones were more, out of the parameters, monitored by each one, which ones were, if you have data or if you have any particular thought, the most predictive, right? What is it? It's feeding bouts, it's feeding amount from the auto feeders, it's physical activity by itself. And this is especially important for what you said. I mean, not all farms can have everything. So if they have to pick, what would that be?
What would it be? Yeah. So I can tell you what we currently know, and some of this is my PhD students' work to answer that question that you're asking. For diarrhea with the robotic feeder only, not accounting for a pedometer, milk intake plus drinking speed seems to be the most valuable information for predicting a calf's about to get clinical diarrhea. And that's a 24-hour window that we usually use for that. Pneumonia, big old question mark. We know the correlations are there. We know when we use everything together, we have great accuracy. We know that when we restrict to just one of the technologies, we improve accuracy, but which one is best is still $1 million thing that needs to be answered. And so the University of Guelph and myself are both trying to answer that question in different ways. They're working on the pedometers, and I'm working on the automated calf feeder data.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
And then,
great question.
So when you mentioned 96% accuracy, and that's kind of an oversimplification sometimes of what it is, right?
Absolutely.
Because accuracy is an overall measure of the performance of a test to tell you if something, it's positive, negative, whatever it is,
Absolutely.
disease. Can you expand a little bit more on, sensitivity and specificity, the predictive values, right? Because you can be highly accurate and have really good sensitivity, but you can do really poorly with specificity, and
that
both
is the scenario
have trade-off,
there.
right, for farm
Absolutely.
management, right? So
always
if you
a
can comment
trade-off.
a little bit more.
Absolutely. So, yep.
Clarify sensitivity and
I
specificity.
was just about to do that.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so sensitivity is going to tell us how many positive animals are actually truly positive out of everything that text says is positive. And specificity is the opposite. It's going to tell us the healthy animals that are actually truly healthy, right? And because of the way that they're calculated, they're almost inversely related. And there's always this balance, and it's a real trade-off in the system. In the particular case of pneumonia, a day delay for finding that calf is a big deal, right? So I care more about a high sensitivity at the sacrifice of having some healthy calves that we're going to have to weed out. And so to answer your question, in those particular cases, we were shooting for really high 90% or greater sensitivity at the sacrifice of not the best specificity. Yeah.
How did it go then? I mean, because you can have awesome sensitivity if you just check everyone, and you will never miss anyone, right? So how did it play out?
Yeah, so to answer that question, and again, with pneumonia, we haven't gotten there yet. We're at the point where we know the machine learning potential is there. but we haven't actually tested it in real time on a group of calves. That's what Brianna is working on right now, is collecting a huge data set of 2,500 calves from one facility from 20 different farms all over the country. So we have all the variability in the world in that data set to do exactly what you're saying, because that's great if it flags everybody, but then it's a waste of my time because I'm looking at everybody, right? So there needs to be a labor savings there. With the KNN, that's the thing. I was working with computer scientists and we're fighting interests. Their interest is the best algorithm ever. My interest is the farm realistic one, right? So this time I'm doing it my own way with my own data set to see if we can answer some of those questions. Very good question, though.
I think the challenge, too, is identifying what is pneumonia.
Yeah.
And that's the big challenge. I see that on the calf ranches that I work with is what's pneumonia, because I'll see repeats on there and you wonder, when is it a new case and when is it and I think there tends to be, and I think that's the beauty of the data set here from what I understand with Melissa, is that you have a lot of confidence in the health records.
Actually, that's my follow-up question.
I figured
so
that.
if you can
Veterinarian.
describe a little bit, like, what exactly was done to evaluate the clinical health status of the animal.
Yep.
Because, and this is a very important thing that I'll emphasize a lot when I talk about the cow side of things. It's all about what you compare it to. And it's all about, we talk a lot about machine learning and all of these things, is what do you use to train the algorithms? And, as someone who was originally trained in repro, and I always tell people, it's like, I don't know why in the world I decided to start working on health, because health is kind of a hell because of that, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's called
pneumonia?
health.
Yeah.
What's diarrhea? What's metritis? What's ketosis, right?
And every
with
farm's
pregnancy,
different.
it's like the cow is pregnant or not.
Yeah, it's
Period, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But with
a
health,
little
it's
bit
such
pregnant.
a challenge. And then it's
Absolutely.
even like, when did the onset of clinical disease start? So, and unless that you're looking at animals daily or even more frequently, it's
Yes.
really, really hard, to interpret any data. So if you could expand on that.
Excellent question. Yeah. So the machine learning has been done many times with retrospective producer reported records, but the issue is,
Yeah,
how consistent is
That's
it?
tough. Yeah.
What I did for my PhD was every single day, 7 days a week, for the first 90 days of life for 120 calves. I health scored those calves.
Awesome. Yeah.
Forced them to go to the bathroom for fecal consistency scoring, dehydration scoring, respiratory scoring, all of the UC Davis scoring. Well, actually, we used the Wisconsin system, but basically the same thing. And twice a week, we also followed up with an ultrasound. And for those clinical animals in all the studies we did, we were really, really strict. We said they had to have 3 centimeters of consolidation, because everyone in the veterinary field agrees that's pneumonia. Plus, they had to have clinical outward signs as well. So they had to have a coughing and or something else. So we were really, really sure they were sick. Now, I've had some people say in the industry, well, maybe that's too late. No wonder your machine learning worked so well, right? But it is a universally agreed upon definition. Every veterinarian I talk to is like, yes, that is a calf that needs to be treated.
So maybe an important question is, if you treat them at that stage, will there still be a positive treatment response? And that's the part that
Everybody except 15% of them would need to be retreated. We did follow them up for relapse. So we left them for 7 days and we didn't do anything because we wanted to look at recovery behavior. That's in scientific reports. And we found actually you can even see which calves get better with the technology. The pedometer was the most useful in that case. So calves that are going to recover, they actually increase their step counts, their activity index, their lying behavior 3 days, as early as 3 days after the initial treatment with antibiotics. The ones that are going to relapse, 7 to 10 days later, those are the calves that really show you that something's not right. And of course, for ethical reasons, we had to follow up at that point with antibiotic treatment, a different one. Yeah.
I think just following up, and I'll stop.
No,
with
this is great.
You rescued me, buddy.
as we talk about metrics of performance for technology, and we use terms as accuracy, sensitivity, specificity with health. And I go back to the onset of clinical disease, and then when does it end or relapses? Is when do you count a health alert as true positive or true negative, right? So was it exactly on the day of diagnosis, or is there a window of time around clinical diagnosis at which you say, well, and I'll use this example, right? If you find the calf sick tomorrow and the algorithm is telling you today that the calf has something going on, was that counted as a false positive or as a true positive, just that there is a delay to clinical diagnosis?
Wouldn't
That's
you
the
agree that's
window.
disease specific, right?
Yeah, no.
Even
lot
for
of these
transition
things are
cows especially.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. So we
The
are
DA, you
using
need to be really
Windows. It's
sensitive.
super difficult, but because you can punish your algorithm, you can make your algorithm look a whole lot better. And the best example is if you use a window of 10 days after clinical diagnosis, and your algorithm tells you 8-9 days later.
Useless.
Fair, right? Yeah, right. It's useless, but it looks very good from an accuracy
Yeah,
perspective.
absolutely.
So those windows are
They
so
matter so
critical,
much.
both on how the algorithms are trained and then how they are validated or
absolutely. So in the particular, all the data that we presented, except the diarrhea algorithm, so the pneumonia stuff for machine learning, day 0. Actual day of diagnosis is it. And
that's very tough for the algorithm.
Absolutely, but that's
really,
why I
tough.
tortured myself and followed 120 calves every single day for 15 months straight.
Yeah. But for the training, you mean, or then for the validation? Because for the training, yes. You can train them, yes. This is the day. You put 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then 1. Yes, sick, right? But for the testing data set, there was only 1 day.
Yes. And we also added another data set from the same farm to test that, and that would be the greedy one I told you about with the economics. That one was the one where we added more calves to penalize it even more if it got it wrong. And the window for diarrhea, we allowed 24 hours because I think it's really important to at least have a watch list of who you need to go look at. Plus, we were trying to test different treatments, so we wanted to have a window before they were actually sick.
That's interesting, and maybe something that people will learn today is that it's a lot tougher with adult cows. It's not that simple. It's really hard, to try to match exactly the day off. You struggle quite a bit too with the fact that while we are measuring these behaviors, physiological parameters, they start changing before clinical diagnosis, right? So, your algorithms may start telling you before clinical diagnoses are present that there's something wrong with the animal, and then it's kind of a conundrum for us as scientists or for people in industry who are trying to bring this to farms. It's like, how do you train the algorithm, and do you call it a false positive if it's telling you 2 days before? And if it tells you 1 day later or 2 days later, is that the end of the world? Does it mean that the algorithm will not be effective for on-farm use? So this term of we call it a window. So a window of time around clinical diagnosis, a few days before and a few days after, that you have to give the algorithm a little bit of leeway there, because if not, without the windows, our results for adult cows are disastrous. Are really, really bad. And again, the overall accuracy looks good, but your sensitivity or your specificity suffers. Your positive predictive values are really, really poor.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Question to follow up on what you're saying. So two points. One is, I guess, penalizing the algorithm would be so disease specific because obviously if you miss a DA for 2 days, the cow is probably going to die. Mm-hmm. Whereas, metritis, you have a little bit more leeway, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So I guess the question becomes, is it partially a challenge with cows in your research because you're using what I would like to describe as a black box algorithm, where you don't necessarily know all the components of, or maybe you do and you have an NDA, possibly, of what all the constituents are of that algorithm. Because we did it kind of backwards, right? Where we created the algorithm around what we wanted. And I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
So for the algorithms that we have been trying to develop, and in fact, your point about the challenges with multiple disorders that may be affecting a cow at the same time are very problematic, right? Because you have more than one thing at a time. We are trying to develop algorithms to identify cows for a clinical exam.
Mm-hmm. Makes
That's
sense.
what we're trying to do, right?
Got it.
So that
Screen
means that the
these
algorithm
cows.
has to identify cows that have
all the things.
Potentially any of the things. So that's the big challenge.
Yeah.
Which maybe one way to get around that is develop individual algorithms, right?
Yes,
that
that
identify the
100%
individual and
agree.
then use what is called ensemble algorithms, which are algorithms that combine multiple algorithms
Yeah.
to come up with the one, because
Yes.
on farm we need a very simple answer. Is yes or no.
That's right.
Is the cow on the list to look at now at 7
Needs
a.m.
to be
or not?
dichotomous. Yeah.
It's that
tell,
simple.
Yeah, we tell people on a practical basis with the auto feeder, you walk the pens first, and then you look at the data.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the data first, and then you ignore the
Might have
rest
some
of the
question
animals in the pen.
marks. Yeah.
And I think it's the same with with the cows.
Maybe a naive question, but AI is advancing so quickly right now. Will that make it easier to refine your algorithms?
Short answer, yes, we hope. I think that's the hope of all of us who are in this field of science, trying to use machine learning or other tools in artificial intelligence, within the field of artificial intelligence, to just do things better. I'm positive and hopeful, but I'll say that it's not as straightforward as we may want it to be. And I think we still have a lot to learn, and we are learning very fast, just like these things are evolving.
Yes,
Our understanding, right? I mean, it's
New
evolving
techniques
constantly.
are coming out all the time too, and you're like, okay.
So yes, new techniques, the variety. I mean, we just sent a paper to JDS. We tested 38 different algorithms on the same data set. So there are even those questions. Which ones do you pick? Yeah. And again, this one is better for this other one is better for this other thing. So, we are all in this conundrum of, how do we get to the very practical, simple, useful decision-making tools that we need on farms. But again, the straightforward answer is yes, it will. It's just going to take some time, to get there, just like most things.
It's going to need more data.
Yeah.
To
Absolutely.
feed.
And it's a little depressing, I feel like, because I get calls all the time, I'm sure you do
Yeah,
too, from
it's
farmers being
constant.
like, what is the perfect system for pneumonia? And I'm like,
Yeah.
we're not there yet. I wish we were. Yeah.
And it's awesome to have such a diversity of technologies and algorithms and all of that, but it's just a little bit overwhelming, with the speed at which these things are evolving and how much we can do good science, because you can do things quickly and and then overpromise, and then when you bring these things to farm, it can be a little bit frustrating.
I completely agree with you. And again, I'm sure you're
Yeah.
collaborating with computer scientists also. We
Yep.
have to. And there's that trade-off, because the computer scientist wants the perfect scenario. They want the lab scenario, right? They want basically what you would do in the lab to validate something for milk fat, right? Whereas we don't want that. We want what the farmer can use, and we're willing to sacrifice a little accuracy to use something more farm practical. And so that's always a pull too, because for them, they need the 96% accuracy algorithm, right? Whereas we want the one that has the balance where it's worth the farmer's time.
Well, the other
between
one,
sensitivity
the other
and
one I think too is I look at farms that have larger number of calves on auto feeders, is tell me which pen I need to go to, and I've been talking to because the companies love to develop technology, but the priority for using that technology is not quite there. I mean, it's just not as important for them, at least on the calf side of things. And I know Melissa can say that. And you mentioned it very well. Tell me what feeder I need to go to, and then tell me when I go on that feeder, what calves do I need to look at? And I don't care whether it's diarrhea or respiratory. You want to, that's when, and I think you showed that in your data, when you combine the data as well as the observation, there's where you bumped up, particularly from just the observation.
There are a couple of things that you guys keep saying about calves that have me very curious. I'm surprised by your statement about the value of having this technology for calves. And if you could elaborate more on that, and then, I think you said farms not using the data or not. So what's going on? I mean, with calves. That,
So to kind of say that, I'm saying the potential is there. Like we've actually restricted algorithms with constraints surrounding economics that a farmer can actually afford, rather than Melissa's perfect lab scenario with 500 things. And it still increases that detection accuracy compared to just paying a really trained person to find them. And if we think about where we are with the prevalence of respiratory disease and diarrhea in our calves on the average dairy, I'm not talking about the top 5% dairies. They don't need the technology, right? I'm talking about that average farm. There's opportunities.
I disagree with you there.
You disagree?
Even the better farms need it, and I think, again, I come back to saying, tell me, I just want to, which animals do I need to look at, and what are my trends? The other part that I think is important to say is looking at this data being part of the lifetime records coming into her value as a cow. Because I hope that what I do is far beyond just the value of treatment and response. But does she?
But that's just one little piece.
Sure. Does she milk better and
so
last longer in the herd?
Yeah. And the thing is that, these are the more tangible things that we have been, tangible as well as, the elephant in the room to start with. Let's find sick calves, let's find sick cows now, so we can treat them and all of that. But then there is a whole lot more underneath, right? And data is going to enable preventative. So cows should not get sick.
Yeah.
Calves should not get sick.
We should
clinically
rescue them.
sick, right? So
Yeah.
we should change management. We should implement interventions before these animals go into clinical disease, right? And that's where I think that technology is going to completely transform what we're doing. It's just that if it is a little bit tough to do what we are doing now, that other piece is even harder,
It's
right?
very
because
hard.
then
Did the treatment work, or your algorithm, or what, right?
because you're
It's
even
challenging.
talking a whole lot more about just like risk. I mean, once that an animal has a disorder, it's there, right? You have the clinical signs, you have something to look at. Let's say we're trying to predict, if a cow in the pre-fresh pen is gonna have a clinical disorder when she's in the fresh pen 3 weeks into lactation. You're pretty far out from that. And then all that you're doing is what risk, what's the risk of that animal going there? And then when you start getting into risks, then, you start having issues with, are you going to implement management strategies just based on risk? Are we going to start managing different subgroups of cows just because we know that there's a risk? But there's there's a confidence interval about that risk,
Could be a healthy cow.
Right, could be,
right?
there are healthy cows, just like we even have now cows that, have alerts and are okay or look okay to us.
Yeah.
It's going to be even more difficult. And then, you have so much time until, when you're measuring what you're measuring and when it might be manifested. A lot of things can happen in between too, right? And to your point, Bob, and your point about farms not being a lab. I mean, dairy farms are the most dynamic systems, I think, probably that we have out there with environmental
Feeds.
factors and probably the worst
Labor
as
factors,
humans, getting on the way of a lot of things. So we may be really good at predicting something. Let's say that we predict cow health postpartum before calving, and then someone completely messes things up at calving, right? That completely throws off any predictions that we do before, right? So there are all these things that.
I want to come back to the practical side.
Yes,
That's, I work with calf ranches, and I work with, where I really developed the insight with the auto feeders was working with several really large herds in Australia that had 800 to 1,200 calves, and you think it, and then I work with the other ones with the calf ranches. So what data do we collect on calves on most farms? Mortality, how many of them collect treatment data? So they have nothing. Yeah. And so anything we do is almost a quantum leap of improvement.
The right
I work with with a facility now, and a lot of those things that I guess that really gave me some incitement. One of the first things that really hit me pretty hard is I was at a farm and the calf manager came in and asked the feeder, how many calves drank slowly this morning? And I thought, so in my conventional farms, that was a little report item that I had. And all you had to do was for the morning, and if they don't drink in the morning, they're not doing well, is tell me how many calves drank slowly this morning. And so the manager gets the report the next day, and whoa, we went from 10 to 20. Something's happening here. And so I think we're being a little bit tough on ourselves too, particularly with calves, because we started at nothing. And it's still a challenge. Right now, this farm has they carry handhelds. So we are recording health treatments on that, and that goes into the data set. The problem is, how soon we detect, but at least we've got that information now. And it's pretty exciting because you look at having, thousands and thousands of calves every day. And so that gives you a little bit more confidence. But, this is something that I really struggle with farms, is getting them to collect anything at all. So that's where I'm a real optimist with the auto feeders. And I guess I got real excited, when I went to some of the first robot farms, and you look at the data that the robot dairy looks at versus the conventional dairy, and it's a different mindset. It's a different mindset.
If they're not just feeding their calves, the ones
Right.
that actually look at the data.
But I've said, if you look at the industry,
That's where it's going.
pretty
Yeah.
slim. I look at the
Sure.
bigger calf ranches, and they record
Arrival. And
no, they record treatments mostly. And we're working at getting birth weights, but that's a struggle. I do record, I've got this farm, and we're recording weaning weights because we can do that electronically, and getting to where every time we've got to move them, they go across the scale. And so now we can get performance. But boy, showing the value is just really hard on those dairy calf and heifer facilities.
How can it be hard? I mean, with
It's,
all the
it's showing them the value of that. And, as I say, I get to work with a lot of people, and that's my biggest challenge, is recording that stuff initially. So I look at the auto feeder, and boy, it gives me a jump on that, except we don't have it in a report format. It's all on individual information, and there's no summary of that information yet.
yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can make it challenging. One thing I can say is I think, there's a lot of sensors coming out now for calves, and there's quite a few on the market actually. And I think that is what some of these calf ranches are thinking about is,
Yeah.
can I see if the whole group is off?
Right.
Can I see if, everyone's not drinking their milk, right? So to kind of predict for something like an epidemic, like I know with the bird flu, there's anecdotal information. I don't know if anyone's actually going to publish it, using ear sensor data from transition cows and other cows to look at, the potential onset of something like bird flu in their herd. And then that's something that I don't know. I've heard farms talk about it in California, and even the tech companies. I don't know if they're going to publish it. But I do think there is an opportunity, even for the really simple calf ranch,
Oh, yeah.
to look at things to see if
Yep.
something is about to go wrong. Like if we think about Salmonella Dublin, it's a nightmare for a
Sure.
calf ranch,
But you look at the classic calf ranch, and boy, they're a low cost operation. They're fortunate to work with one that's not that mindset. But to say you're going to adopt this technology now, maybe when labor starts becoming a lot more of a challenge, that may be something. And but boy, just getting data, getting them to see the value of the data, and we can talk all we want to, but it's a tough sell because they're a really low cost model by and large. And I look at the data that comes from a lot of these places, and it's pretty minuscule, and it's largely just health data, and that's it.
Yeah, I could totally agree with you that some of the larger ranches aren't thinking about it yet, but I can tell you a lot of medium to 1,000 cow herds are calling me.
Yep.
And they're
Very
asking.
different. Very different.
They want to know. They're
Yep.
like, what can I buy for my calves?
Yep.
Which is shocking because 5 years ago, people laughed at me that I was doing this type
Yeah.
of research.
No, I think that's the perfect model, is the 500 to 1,000, maybe even 2,000 cow.
'Cause
The
they can
one I
afford
have
it.
has, there's 1,200 calves. And, and I disagree with you. You say, oh, I don't want to get above 15 calves in a pen. The one farm I work with, we build a pen a day. 25 calves go in a day.
Well, they
And-
have the herd size to make that work, right? I should
right.
have clarified.
And they have the people. And
The
they have
age-
the people.
the
yeah,
age
and
difference is
well, but you
huge
look
for
at the
respiratory.
literature, and some of the European literature said, oh, don't have more than 10 calves in a pen. That's economic ridiculousness. I mean, you can't afford it.
Well, it goes back to what Julio was saying about risk, right? Because there are some farms that can handle that increased risk, increasing the group size. But the reality is that if you're going to make a universal blanket statement, you should go for the smaller group because everyone can do it.
Covering yourself.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, exactly. You might recommend the 20 calf group. You better have an average maximum age between calves of 2 days
Yep.
to make
No,
that work.
There are no absolutes.
No.
Julio, can you talk a little bit about the presentation you gave today? I mean, I'm
We're
sure
off
we've
of
already kind of
calves.
interspersed some of that in there, but
A little bit of it.
Yeah, you should talk about the economic part because I think it's really cool.
Okay, very good. So, well, I talked obviously about adult cows, and primarily most of our work has been done on identifying fresh cows with health disorders, and the reasons are obvious. That's when cows, have the highest risk of having clinical health disorders of interest, other than mastitis, which happens throughout the entire lactation. Metabolic and digestive disorders, metritis, happen very early on. And so today I briefly, summarize what we have learned in terms of, again, how the patterns of the parameters measured by the sensors change. And again, like Melissa said, for calves, tons of data.
yeah. So what sensors and technology were you using?
Very good. So we have done a lot of work with wearable sensors that monitor rumination time and physical activity, and that combine rumination time and physical activity to create these health alerts, which, by the way, maybe it's worth clarifying a little bit. I mean, a health alert is basically a tool that tells you, again, is this yes, no thing, or at least some is like a gradient, is like green, yellow, red, or a number that, below a certain threshold or above a certain threshold, someone should look at the individual because something may be happening with the animal. So anytime that I say a health alert, that's what I mean. It's like a yes, no thing that tells a farm worker to go and look at that animal, or not look at the ones that don't have the alert. So rumination, physical activity. We have used quite a bit daily meal weights, so drops in milk yield, which is one of, if not the oldest parameter that dairies have been using to identify cows with health disorders, which, by the way, doesn't work that well.
Yeah. Conductivity doesn't work either.
Conductivity
Were you measuring
from
by
us.
quarter?
Say again.
Were you measuring by quarter?
No.
Okay.
Cow level.
yield.
Cow level milk
Yeah.
yield. For milk yield. Conductivity, no.
No.
You see, you can do quarters in robots, or you can do a whole composite sample in the cow. In any case, so eating behavior as well, and body temperature are more recent. So rumination, physical activity are the ones that we had for the longest time, and more recently companies added eating behavior, and which is not feed intake. Eating behavior is eating behavior. Is the cow
At the
eating
bunk,
is
maybe.
typically the cow with her head down at the feed bank. There is, by the way, at least one system now that does measure intake, which we're working with the company. And
Is that the Alpha Milk one?
yeah, the
We
Aficor.
had them in a
Oh, you
podcast
had them,
earlier.
yes.
Yeah.
So we collaborate with AFI. We have been collaborating for quite a while, and we're working with them on understanding their data and putting it to use, and doing a little bit of validation as well. So those are the parameters, and we have done a lot of research. My group, as well as many other groups in the U.S. and overseas that have done work, and parameters measured by sensors change when cows have a clinical health disorder. So that was a simple message. Now, how do they change? So the magnitude of the change and then the timing of the change varies by the parameter being measured by the sensor. By the sensor itself, different companies have different algorithms and different ways of measuring and reporting things. But I think that the most important part of my presentation was what's the value proposition of these technologies for integration on day-to-day operation of dairy farms. And one thing that I always do in my presentations, I have to make the case, going back to the whole area of health and what we were just talking about. And I think that we are still lucky that the dairy industry is so diverse that no two dairy farms are the same, and they have completely different management styles and even goals and interests. That there are two types of farms: the ones that spend little time and put little effort, or don't have a systematic approach to look for sick cows. That's one extreme. And then you have the other extreme, the ones that put a lot of time and effort on finding cows with health disorders because they don't want to miss anyone. And we have done research trying to understand how bringing technology to those two type of farms can help them and what the drawbacks are. And in an oversimplification of all the research that we have done, and we can discuss things in more detail, so farms that currently do little to nothing to identify cows with health disorders, those are the ones that have the opportunity to find more cows with conditions, help them through treatments, and improve their performance. So we have done one study that we observe a gain in daily milk yield for the first 21 days in milk by using automation versus very simple visual observation. And that's the one Melissa was talking about for the economics. So we accounted for all the extra costs of the technology, so the collars, the time, the labor to put the collars on cows, all the extra treatment, all the extra clinical exams, and accounting for all of that, the value of the extra milk and the reduction in replacement costs offset completely the extra expenses, and it was even positive. There's a difference of almost $20 on average per cow within the first 100 days in milk by incorporating automation in a farm like that. So again, it's like, a farm that is not finding as many cows as they probably should and treat as many cows as they should, there is potential to help cows that are going undetected.
What's really interesting about that is that was the farm that the repro technology for the sensors for heat detection also really benefited, was those farms that were not really actively looking for heats.
Wow.
And so it's very interesting that you found the same thing for transition, right?
It's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like sending the same message.
The case, so now with the other type of farms, the other case that I make is like, we people are really good at finding sick cows. We are really good at finding cows in heat. What's the problem? We don't have the people or people's time, quality time, to dedicate to those tasks anymore. So that's where technology, is filling that key gap. So then that brings me to the other extreme. So for farms that have in place a systematic, intensive program to look for sick cows, when we compare that to technology, to automation, we found even fewer sick cows. So, fewer sick cows with automation than with the traditional intensive monitoring program. But that difference in cows detected did not lead into more cows sold or dead, and no differences in milk yield or in reproductive performance. So the message is slightly fewer cows detected, which I'll have to discuss that in a moment, but without negative consequences on herd performance outcomes, which is what most farms care about. So, I always tell in my presentation, it's like, well, Julio tells me that, and I'm a dairyman. I said, why in the world do I want any technology if I'm not finding any more sick cows, I don't make more milk? It's labor. It's labor reductions and cow time. So human time is critical. Cow time is also critical, right? So time to lay down in a stall, to eat when the cow wants, to express her natural behaviors versus being locked up. I was actually talking to a couple of farmers that came to talk to me after my talk, and it resonated with them a lot, what we did. And I asked them, how long do you keep your cows? Because I have an intensive program to look at my sick cows, so I want to go away from that, and I see your research, and that's encouraging to me. And I said, how long do you keep your cows locked up? And he said, 1.5 hours to 2 hours per day. That's a lot of time
Especially
for these
on
fresh cows, right?
Yep.
These are cows that need to be eating.
They don't want to be, standing in headlocks, or when we sort cows, right? So there is that value. So it's reducing cow manipulation, reducing the amount of time that cows spend away from doing the things that they can and or want to do, and then people. which is becoming such a critical thing.
Don't
for
you think
farms.
that has a negative impact on some of the things that you pick up with technology? If they're locked up like that, they don't have an opportunity to show some of those behaviors.
But the idea is that they don't.
Right.
So, I mean, we use technology. So
Sure.
technology is watching cows and telling us which are the ones that need attention, and we only focus on those ones. That's the value proposition of technology, is saying these are the 10 cows that I have to look at today, and my other 9,990 do what they have to do, right? So in fact, it's to go away from doing that.
Because with calves, I think that's really the thing is, and that doesn't come across quite strongly, is to succeed with this, you got to feed them a lot more milk. And people that try to adopt the technology and still don't change the behavior, you look at calves, even fed a gallon a day, they're ready to drink again in 4 hours. And it's such a huge difference. And I think that's something that people have a hard time grasping about some of that technology, is because you've got to change your management a whole lot more to really see the benefits of those things.
It's very true, because when, kind of to comment on what you just said, when you start to restrict the cow's natural behavior by putting her in a headlock, or in the case of calves, you're restricting what they naturally would go do, right? And the robot is going to allocate that a certain amount. The calf doesn't know that it's credit. It has to learn that, and a lot of them don't figure it out, honestly. And so again, that's kind of the big message here, is that if you want to get the best bang for your buck, you should try to use the technology to be a passive watcher on that animal, so you're not modifying their behavior, whether it's a calf or a cow.
One of the big problems we have with calf management, and you're not a veterinarian, right?
I am.
He is a veterinarian.
Okay, so you're a veterinarian. But
that's
the
why he talks about predictive value.
Is that bad?
But the traditional veterinarian doesn't want these calves touching each other. And they don't want to put them on the feeder until they're 2 weeks old. And at 2 weeks old, they've learned to drink twice a day. And it's a very different animal that, if you're waiting 2 weeks before they put on the auto feeder, it takes them another week to 10 days before they realize, I can get more feed. And so, how we've managed calves traditionally has been so different than, I think, some of the key things with the auto feeder. And that's a huge problem.
If dairies are considering using technologies, they have to grasp the idea that they're going to have to change their management.
Absolutely.
You adopt technology to change management, to
That's
make
right.
the best out of technology, right? And to improve your management system and deal with bottlenecks or find opportunities that are not, we cannot take advantage of without technology.
So how does the veterinary profession adopt it, some of the stuff that you're doing? Do you see any challenges with that at all?
So in general, there are very few veterinarians that are on fresh pens checking cows, right? So veterinarians have taken a different role, in health monitoring, and it's either, training, so training those that are in the pen looking for cows, or designing the protocols that people are doing both things at the same time. So in general, positively, I would say, at least, the veterinarians that I work with, in fact, a lot of the research that we do is in collaboration with veterinarians. They are eager to learn on how they can use technology to improve, again, the protocols that they develop and the training that they do with people. And, as farms get larger and larger, the idea that we're going to be able to spend the time required for a thorough clinical exam on every cow, that's the thing from the past. Small dairies, you could argue, but even in small dairies, you don't want to manipulate the cow. You don't want to alter their behavior. So in general, I think it's positive, and they're eager to learn about what.
And I think that's one of the problems with calves, because how many DVMs really spend time with the calf program, and a pretty small proportion of those that do that. And so, it's a real educational challenge that I've had, and I've spoken at veterinary meetings, and boy, the first thing is, man, I don't want those calves. And the best animal, and I think you would agree with this, is, first of all, you have to have phenomenal maternity and excellent colostrum, and I want them there at 2 or 3 days of age, and they learn like that, and it's just really phenomenal, and just a tremendous difference in behavior. and that's another confounding factor that you see in some of the data that we've had on farms, because we never even looked at that on our field studies, and I know that had an impact on it probably, and yours is probably heavily controlled on that. But when do they come on the feeder?
Are you talking about the study where we're following the 2,000
Well, in
animals?
general, in general.
Oh, in general, that varies so much by farm.
Yeah.
It varies so much by
And that
farm.
really
It's
influences
sometimes
the research.
2 days of age is when I see the great. Honestly, 3 days. It's 2 to 3 days of age. Calf is suckling really well, very motivated,
Yep.
wants to go on the feeder. Put the calf on the feeder.
Yep.
Don't keep them in a pen. There's something to be said. I think there's some neuroplasticity that's going on in the calf brain really early in life that we haven't looked at,
Yep.
where they're a lot more flexible with their learning. And
Yep.
then you learn as they get, and they've done this research in social research with calves, that, as you keep them in one particular system, they become less flexible about being able to unlearn things.
Like people.
Julio, I want to circle back with you real quick on that second group of dairymen where they were doing a good job of,
Yes.
finding the disease, but the technology didn't help with that. But what it did do was allow them to reduce labor costs and give the cows back some more time. Does that then pay for the technology? Did you look at that economics?
In some of the not so detailed analysis that we have done, for the most part it does. Of course, it varies dramatically by how much time and effort they are putting, how many people are involved. Some of the analysis we have done, within 3 to 5 years. I mean, most of the time, at least some of the technologies that we have looked at, again, collars for rumination and physical activity, they do break even or are positive depending on labor costs, number of people involved, and monitoring cows. So for the most part, yes. And as labor costs, at least in New York State, it's increasing at pretty dramatic rates, even, faster than the cost of technology is increasing, because technology also goes up.
Yeah, great answer. Guys, I could go on all day with it. This has been fascinating, but I think they're getting ready to turn the lights out on us. So
Okay.
it might not be a bad idea to kind of close it down. And I think, though, that Julio and I think we need to, Melissa, we need to follow up on this again and maybe do some webinars, because this is fascinating, and I think our audience will love it. So let's circle back on that later on. What I'd like to do now is just kind of summarize from your own perspectives a couple things that you think the audience ought to know or would like to know from the conversation. And Julio, if you don't mind, would you want to start?
Tonight's last call question is brought to you by NitroSure Precision Release Nitrogen. NitroSure delivers a complete TMR for the rumen microbiome, helping you feed the microbes that feed your cows. To learn more about maximizing microbial protein output while reducing your carbon footprint, visit balchem.com/NitroSure.
So, in general, I think that automated health monitoring technologies can help most farms. Now, how they help, how much they help, and what are the challenges for farms varies a lot by farm. And it depends a lot on what I described earlier, right? The two extremes, and then as I showed today, there's everything in between. So I think that our science, our research has shown that there is value. It's a matter of identifying the value for an individual farm, right? And as I said too, I think that we're just scratching the surface with technology. We have focused on, some of the big elephants in the room or dealing with the most immediate things. But there's tremendous value on what we can learn about cows, what we can learn about how we manage cows, how the environment affects cows, and then develop decision-making tools based on the data generated by technology. And this is what I'm most excited about, for the future, right? And, whether it's AI or very simple ways to classify cows in groups with just some data, I think that there's tremendous potential to do better, be more efficient, more sustainable, and improve the lives of people on cows.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
Thank you.
Melissa, how about a couple things from a calf perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I probably won't be as erudite as him. He had such a great thing to say. But I think what we know currently is that diarrhea in calves can be detectable with things like accelerometers, robotic milk feeder data, so can pneumonia. And there is value to using machine learning algorithms to find those animals, even when we constrain budgets and think about how much money we have. However, we're not at the point yet where we can say, okay, calf 5555 is ready to go. I think that the transition cow research is a little bit farther ahead of us. To be honest, we get inspired from what they're doing to find these diseases. However, we have mercy because diarrhea happens at a very different time than pneumonia. So we're able to get a lot better predictive algorithms, I think, because of that. But the other opportunity, I think, that we didn't talk about, we could always do another webinar later, is there's opportunity to do something with those animals at that point, right? So for finding a calf before she's clinical, what do we do? And that's the $1 million research question. I mean, people are looking at things like colostrum, but colostrum's expensive. We've looked at things like painkillers, like NSAID. I know Bob had talked about Banamine before we got recorded, going in with something like that and figuring out what that is. I think that's a huge research career opportunity. We just have more work to do with the algorithms before we start doing that. Yeah.
I think there's one thing that we haven't talked about with the calves, and that's the welfare. These animals are very, very different. They make better animals as older animals. They adapt to new situations. The research is there from University of British Columbia.
You mean socially?
Socially, yeah.
Not
socially.
technology calves.
No,
Yeah.
socially, and when they're in groups. And they adapt to new feeds. They adapt to new situations better. And the consumer loves to see these calves in a group pen. I have a 4-second video that I start my presentations with, and it's a bunch of calves running around the pen with their tails woke up. And you just look at it and say, wow, that's really nice. And I think that's a component that's really important.
As I said, enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Appreciate you guys sharing your experience and with us. To our loyal audience, as always, thank you for joining us once again. We do hope you learned something. We hope you had some fun, and we hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour, and you're
Thank you.
always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests, so please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.